All right.
Hi. Oh, have we started yet?
Yeah, go for it.
Hi. I'm Sarah Mei. I am a Ruby and JavaScript developer from San Francisco, and I have done probably about 25 different talks in my career over since 2009. So I've been doing talks since 2009. My first talk in 2009 was about teaching Ruby to kids, to high schoolers. And I had written a blog post about it, and I decided to turn that blog post into a talk. And I think the only reason they accepted my talk was because the blog post was up and it showed that I could like actually string some words together into something that was vaguely coherent. Because at that point I was completely unknown as a speaker. I had never done a talk. But I got that talk accepted to RubyConf in 2009. And so it all kind of went from there. And the reason I chose that topic was because it was a very comfortable one for me. I decided not to start with a very technical topic. I started with something a little more in the middle. And I think that that was a good choice for me because I would have been much more nervous otherwise. So since then, I've done a bunch of technical talks, and now I'm kind of back to talking about team dynamics and that kind of stuff. So
Awesome. That's super cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Raquel Velez. I live also in the Bay Area in California, and I work at NPM Inc. in Oakland. And I've given probably also about 25 talks. And they've almost all of them have been about robots.
which is an awesome topic.
Which is a very niche topic for sure. Yeah, my first talk was it was about Node, but the reason I got into speaking was actually because I went to a Node conference. It was NodeConf Summer Camp 2012, and I met the curator of JSConf US, Voodoo Tiki God, aka Chris Williams, and he was like, "Wait a minute, you do robots, and now you're in this Node thing. We should talk about Node and robots. And are you going to give a talk at some point? Because you should give a talk at JSConf, and then you should, yes, don't give any other robot JS talks ever until you come to JSConf." And I was like, oh my God, okay. But very much like you, Sarah, like my first robotics talk, I used to be a robotics engineer before coming into the land of the internet. And, hi. And so it was really comfortable for me to talk about that. But technically my first talk was about Node, which was terrifying because I didn't really fully understand Node. And I would argue, even though I work at NPM, I still don't fully understand Node. But I give lots of talks about Node, nevertheless. So I think that actually brings up a really interesting, that kind of gives a nice segue of how do you decide what you want to talk about? Because I think a lot of people, they start off with, so I know I want to give a talk, but what do I talk about?
Yeah, that's a really hard one because a lot of times, at least for me, it was better for me to pick a topic that I felt very comfortable with at first. But later on, you're just going along and you're a programmer and you're working on your programming job, and like, where do you have time to like think about what would make a good talk? A lot of the stuff that I would do sometimes is I would keep an index card at my desk, and if I run into something that felt like I had to research it to figure it out, whatever it was, even if it was only just a couple of minutes, I would write it on the index card. And not everything that I wrote on the index card was like a talk in itself, but what I could do is I could look over the course of like a week or two at all the stuff I'd written down and try and see if there's a pattern there, like, if there's, different things that I had figured out that I could lump together into something more like a narrative or a story, into something that's more cohesive and would make a talk. And so I got a lot of my once I was sort of in the talk scene and I understood sort of how it worked, and I started feeling like I could do technical topics. That's how I came up with stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, so like a lot of times people ask me on Twitter, like, oh, how do I pick a topic? And I've boiled it down to three like for me, like the three basic things that I always find from a really good talk, either what excites you, if you can answer the question, like what excites you, and I mean like really excites you, or what really pisses you off. Like what infuriates you to the point where you're like, people need to know how awful this is.
How not to do this.
Yeah. Or like what do you want to learn? Because I think I'm definitely one of the believers in the best way to learn something is to teach it. So if there's something that you're like, man, I really wish I understood testing better, it's like, well, write a talk about it. What are best practices? What makes sense? What what are the biggest pitfalls of testing, and BDD versus TDD, and da 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 da. Figuring out the answers to one of those questions is just a really great way to start brainstorming. But I love your index card idea. I think I might try that for my next one.
I think another thing you can do if you're a writer, if you feel very comfortable writing, is you can, if you put a bunch of blog posts or a bunch of, like, in my case, tweet storms out there, and you see which ones people respond to. Like sometimes the one that you think people were super excited about, like no one even really notices, and sometimes the one you're like, I'm just going to toss this off, and I'm pretty sure that no one in the entire world cares about this except me, and then that's the one that ends up on Hacker News. And so I think it's really interesting to sort of get that feedback from a larger, like a wider community. So if your company has a blog, for example, or someplace that you could, post that kind of stuff, it's very interesting to get feedback from people about what they find interesting.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. What about, so you mentioned that your first talk was not super technical, whereas for me, my talk was super technical. Let's talk about because I know that a lot of people, especially the people attending this event, are going to be like, oh God, what do I talk about? I'm not technical enough, or whatever. Like, I know one of the major questions people ask me is, but everybody's already talked about testing. What could I possibly bring to it? But I don't want to be the other diversity talk or whatever. Like what advice do you have for people who are trying to think through those different things?
I think that, so there's a couple of things. One is, in addition to the consulting work that I do, I also run Ruby Central along with two other folks, Marty and Evan. And we are the people that run both RailsConf and RubyConf. So I have seen a lot of conference talk proposals over the last couple of years. One of the things that's been interesting about our conferences, and I'm not sure if you've seen this in JavaScript conferences as well, but we have a lot of folks coming in to the conferences that are relatively new. New to Ruby, but also in some cases new to programming, coming from sometimes from other technical disciplines, but sometimes coming from non-technical disciplines. Especially in San Francisco, we've got so many of these different code schools and things. And so what we've seen is really a sea change in the types of folks we get coming to these events. And the interesting thing about that is that often someone who is closer in experience level to these people who are quite new is in a better position to explain something than I am. Because I've been doing this for 20 years, and all of these things that I learned 20 years ago, now it doesn't even occur to me that I might need to explain them in a way that people who are new to the community could understand. Mm-hmm. And so I have found that some of the best talks, some of the talks that beginners loved the most, were basically from folks who were not a whole lot more experienced than they were, because they could speak the same language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. That's fantastic. I like to think that even if somebody's already given a talk on a topic that you're interested in, it doesn't matter. You could literally give the exact same talk, but as long as you put your spin on it, your own personal perspective, then it's a brand new talk. It's no longer the testing talk, it's your testing talk. And I keep talking about testing, I don't know why. But just it's super important, I think, for people to recognize that their personal experience far outweighs the commonality of a talk topic. That's what really makes it yours, and what really makes it interesting is the way that you have approached this problem. And so, yeah,
And
definitely.
it's always, even if you think it might not be interesting to other people, it's always interesting to other people. For example, um, there was a woman I worked with who came from a mathematical background. So she had a background in sort of doing proofs, and she had been in academia for a little while. Decided that was not for her. Came to programming and was like, well, I mean, I had this idea about how writing tests is like doing proofs in math and how it's different. But I'm pretty sure no one would care about that. And I was like, are you kidding me? Everyone loves that. Like, if you can find some way to make like math, that kind of math accessible to people who are not, most of them not used to doing that type of thing, like that would be amazing. Like, show them that writing proofs is really not all that different from writing tests, and like what, and what the conceptual differences are. And it turned into this amazing talk that she eventually did at the Golden Gate Ruby conference a few years ago. And but she thought, I mean, she was like, who would be interested in this? But like, I guarantee you, someone is interested in that. And conference organizers are always looking for things that are outside of the mainstream technical, the list of technical. Oh, we got to have this talk, we got to have that talk. Stuff that's outside of that is great, and I think a lot of folks coming into the community are in a great position to do that kind of thing.
Definitely, definitely. So, okay, so once you have a talk topic, how do you write a proposal? That's the next biggest question that I get.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely one of those things where it's like, well, there's a bunch of text boxes. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to put in all the text boxes. And each conference has a slightly different set of text boxes with a different number of characters that it'll take than the other conferences. And like, what am I supposed to put in here? And so one of the things that I tell people a lot is that you have two chances to convince an attendee to come to your talk. And the first chance you have is the title. And the other chance you have is the abstract, which is like the little paragraph that shows up in the program. Now, 95% of the people who are at the conference are never going to look at the abstract. They're going to look at the title, and they're going to pick based on the title which talk they want to go to. And so your job in both the title and the abstract is to convince them that they will be able to do amazing things after they leave your talk that they can't do now. And Kathy Sierra used to talk about this a lot. She would say things like, you need to convince your users, like you need to show them how badass they're going to be when they leave your talk. Nice. And then they will show up. And that, if you can do that, if you can sort of write that from with that in mind, you will end up with a proposal that conference organizers will gravitate towards.
Definitely, definitely. Because I think it's important to also point out that the conference organizer who's reviewing the talk proposals is basically the first line of attendees. Like, they have to decide, would I want to see this talk? And then they'll kind of pass it along to the attendees, decide if they want to see your talk. Definitely. I also want to point out, so I've done a bunch of conference proposal reviews. I've been on the speaker selection committee for both JSConf and RobotsConf. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen somebody put in the abstract box or description or whatever you want to call it, but every single conference at least does that. So the title and description or title and abstract. It'll say Ember. And that's it. And you're like, okay.
Go on.
Ember. Fantastic. That's not even the title. It's just the description. And you're like, what about Ember? This is an extremely broad topic. We could spend probably multiple days. In fact, there is an Ember Conf where they just talk about Ember for the entire conference. Be a little specific.
Yeah, I think the more specific you can get about what actually you're going to talk about, the better. And often there are other fields besides the abstract and description that only the reviewers of the talk can see. So it won't show up in the program, like attendees will never see it, but those are your spots to explain anything that you might need to explain. Like if you've got, show up and you'll see the 5 magic tips of testing, like that is the place in which you would want to say, here are the 5 magic tips of testing I'm going to show people in this talk so that they can have the most information about what is going to happen at that talk.
Right.
And so those hidden fields can, or the sort of reviewer only fields can be a useful place to explain what you're getting at. But like you were saying, like it's also important to explain that in the abstract, at least to the extent you can with a limited character count.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. I tend to err on the side of wordier, mostly because I tend to see more proposals that are too short than too long. But sometimes people are like, well, I could talk about this, or I could talk about this, or I could talk about this other thing, or I could talk about this fourth thing. And you're like, oh my God, please, if you are excited about 4 different topics, put together 4 different proposals. Don't try to put all of the proposals into one. Because the fact of the matter is, especially if it's a really popular conference, reviewers have maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes to review your proposal before deciding whether it's going to go on to the next round or not. Because normally it kind of funnels. There's like, 300 people are applying for a speaking opportunity, and then you like narrow it down to like 100, and then narrow it down to 50, and then narrow it down, whatever. So keeping in mind that people only have like a minute or 2 to decide if this proposal is something that they want to push up the, to the dwindling numbers of proposals, don't put a tome, like it doesn't need to be in the next great British novel. It just needs to be enough information about one topic, as specific as you can get without totally ruining the entire thing. I like to leave a little bit of a, we'll see what happens, in my conference proposals, but I'm weird.
And to that point, I think that like the vast majority of conferences are totally okay if you submit more than one talk. Mm-hmm. In fact, they would rather you do that. Mm-hmm. And the reason is a lot of times, as a conference organizer, you've got a lot of things on your mind when you're going through this list. And one of them is, what is the quality of these proposals? But one of the other things you have to think about is, you don't want an entire, unless you're EmperConf, you don't want an entire program full of Ember stuff.
Yep.
And so you need to balance different topics. Like at RailsConf, we balance stuff about Rails itself and also stuff about sort of the ecosystem around Rails, like deployment and front-end development and object-oriented design and design, like visual design. So all these things that are sort of around Rails but not necessarily part of it. But so we can't have an entire thing full of like visual design talks, right? So sometimes you're like, oh, I really like this talk, or I really like this speaker, but we already have a talk. We've already sort of confirmed, maybe we've already confirmed a talk on that topic. Mm-hmm. And so we can't take this one. But if you've submitted another proposal, sometimes if they're interested in having you as a speaker, then that will sort of up your chances of getting a slot if you can give them some options to choose from.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. But at the same time, be forewarned, don't propose a topic that you're not interested in.
Oh, that's the worst. Like then you have to write the talk.
Yeah, exactly. Because like some people are like so eager to be a speaker that they'll, they're like, well, the law of large numbers is if I submit 20 proposals, then one of them has to get picked, right? And you're like, yes, but if you really, really, really hate talking about, I don't know, bitwise operators, and you give a proposal on bitwise operators, like you're going to be miserable putting that talk together. And then you're going to try to give the talk and you're going to be miserable on stage, and everyone's going to be like, wow, that person looks miserable, and now I'm miserable. And then it's just a miserable experience for everyone. So don't do it. Don't do it.
Because talks take so long. I didn't realize when I got started how long it would take me to do a talk. And I have over time decided that it takes me about an hour for each minute of the talk. So if it's a 40-minute talk, it takes me about 40 hours to do it. And sometimes longer, very rarely shorter, most of the time longer. So sort of at least. Yeah. And I think, I don't think I'm an abnormally slow talk writer either. Like I think I've talked to other people and heard similar estimates. And so if you're going to spend 40 hours thinking about something, it's really, really helpful if it's something you're actually interested in and something you're excited about. It makes it much easier. And people can see that on stage, like you were saying, right? Like they can see the enthusiasm that you've got for a topic.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Speaking of which, make sure that enthusiasm comes across in your proposal. Like, I have a tendency to use way too many emoticons and way too many exclamation points, and this is how people know I'm excited about things. But your word choice really matters too, right? Like if you're just like, and in this talk, we're going to talk about bitwise operators, period. It's like, okay, thank you. That's perfectly, like that's pretty specific-ish, but you don't sound excited about it.
Well, that and it's also like not oriented towards the attendee, right? Like rather than talking about, I try to avoid saying, if I'm ever tempted to say in this talk, we will talk about, you will learn, blah, blah, blah. Like I really try and avoid that kind of stuff. And instead I think about like, like for something like bitwise operators, maybe you could say something like, have you ever wondered what the and or does? Are there things beyond and or? What would you like if you want to sort of get people's attention about like, what is it, sort of capture a problem they might have and then say, you will see the solution if you come to this talk.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I think that like, especially folks that come from academia tend to struggle with this type of thing because academic proposals are quite a different beast and tend to be much more like, here's the things I will talk about and it's A, B, C. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a difference between those types of proposals that a lot of times in the tech scene, we really are looking for something that is closer to sales writing than to like technical writing, really, because what you're doing is convincing people that this is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I tend to do more of a story. like once upon a time, there was a robot.
And that is very effective. People love stories.
People
and it is
love
totally possible to do a story arc in a title, like a very short story arc.
Yes.
But like, one of the very common ones that I see is the three bears, basically. Well, we had this problem and we tried this, but it was too big for us because of this. And then we tried this other thing, but that didn't work because of X. And then we tried this thing in the middle and it was amazing and it all worked out. Like that type of, so that's a very common story arc in technical talks.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that where you learned something that was like, wow, we messed up a whole bunch of times and then we found the solution, or even like I've seen some good talks where people didn't even have the solution at the end. They're just like, here are all the things we tried. And they were all awful.
None of them worked. If you find something that works, let me know.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, oh. What do you think about work in progress type stuff? So what I mean by that is I have this idea. I want to build this amazing application that doesn't exist yet. And I haven't started it yet. But I mean, Scotland JS and Scotland CSS are in June. So that gives me almost 6 months to work on it. That means, or 5 months, I guess, at this point. So 5 months, that's plenty of time to build an app. Let's write a proposal about that and see if we can talk about it in time. What do you think about those?
I think that those can occasionally work out. I think that it's really, if you know that you've got good time management and you can like make that happen, what I see happen a lot more often than that is that they get up to the last like 2 weeks before and they're like, I need to get something working now. And I think, so I guess I'm of two minds though, because I have done talks, I have proposed talks on topics that I didn't know a whole lot about at the time. Like I knew enough to be able to write something interesting, right? I was a beginner in like, for example, I don't know, this must have been 4 or 5 years ago now. I was a beginner and I had just done a Backbone JS project. And I didn't really understand it that well, but I understood it enough to write like a talk proposal about it. And then what I figured was like if they accept the talk proposal, then I get to learn about Backbone JS in order to write the talk. And that was actually pretty successful for me. I got to learn a whole bunch of stuff about Backbone JS. I got to see other people's Backbone projects to sort of get a survey of what they were like. And so that was really useful. So on the other hand, like I think that committing to building something is a different thing. Yeah, especially if there's like any kind of like deliverable that needs to be done, like some library needs to be published or something's going to hit 1.0 or like that's kind of asking for trouble, I think.
Yes.
Making trouble for yourself, I guess maybe is a better way of putting it.
I have totally done that, by the way, and fallen flat on my face. There was one time where I proposed a high five robot. So you could give it high fives, and sure enough, 2 months before, I was like, this is not happening. There is no conceivable way that I'm going to be able to build this thing. And at least that was 2 months ahead of time, right? Like, for a lot of people, I think they'll be like a week before, because let's be real. How many people do we know who procrastinate till the very last minute? A lot. And so it'd be like the night
pretty much
before.
like all of us.
Yeah. It's just like, oh my God, it's not working. I'm never going to be able to build this. But I've found that if you figure it out early enough, you can often, not always, but often, contact the organizer and be like, wow, I came up with this fantastical idea that is no way going to happen. What do I do? In my case, the organizer was like, oh, don't worry about it. Do you have other topic ideas? Because we want you to be the speaker, not necessarily that specific topic. Although if you can come up with a similar topic that's along the lines to be really useful. And so I did, and it actually turned out to be one of my best talks. Just really toned down what the robot could do. But then instead of like, hey, look at this really amazing, impossible robot, I instead did, here's how to build your own robot. And that was like really fun. So it works out. But I think in general, please learn the lesson from me. Don't try to like envision yourself building this incredible, actually impossible thing, and that you'll start once your proposal is accepted. Because I've also known a lot of events, and this isn't necessarily for Scotland JS, but or CSS, but other conferences sometimes won't even tell you until a month before the conference. Like, yes, you've been accepted. Yay!
Yeah, I got an acceptance 2 weeks before a conference once, and I was just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, well, we just passed the 2 week mark in which I was supposed to tell my manager if I was going to be gone. So, yeah, that was awkward.
Yes.
But I think the larger the conference, the more notice you tend to get, but that's not a hard and fast rule for sure.
Right.
The Ruby community particularly has a bunch of very small, sort of locally oriented conferences that tend to be run by people that are doing it in addition to their day job, and it's a lot of work, and so yeah, they tend to be like perhaps slightly less organized.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay, so we've come up with our ideas for what to talk about, and we've put together a proposal. Now what?
Well, now you got to turn it into a talk.
Definitely. Well, I mean, okay.
How does that work?
Yeah. First, let's talk about how to, like, what happens when it's accepted or when it's rejected. Like, I think we can both agree, like, when your talk is accepted, it's like, yay, this is fantastic. I remember the first time my first talk getting accepted, I like ran around the house because I was like, oh my God, I did it.
It's very exciting. But I also got a lot of rejections.
Yeah.
Especially when I was first starting out. And I think, you get sort of this generic, like, oh, we had a lot of great talks this year, and so we couldn't include all of them, so we can't include yours. Sorry. And it can be a bit discouraging, I think, especially if you don't get feedback about what they liked or what they didn't like. A lot of times organizers will be open to giving you that feedback if you contact them directly, for smaller conferences for sure, and sometimes with the larger ones too. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Right.
And sometimes, that stuff is super hard to hear, at least for me, but sometimes it's kind of useful. Like, oh, and sometimes it's like something totally dumb. They're like, we couldn't take your talk because we'd already taken a keynote with the same topic, right? And it's just like, oh, okay, well, that makes me feel better, I guess, but still a little bit silly, like I should have sent in more than one. The other thing I want to say, coming back a bit to the idea of changing your topic after you've started the talk, is that a lot of times, depending on the size of the conference, the smaller conferences especially, what they really want you to do is show up and do something awesome, do something interesting. If it doesn't adhere exactly to what you proposed, they're probably okay with it. They really just want you to do a talk that attendees will love. That said, some of the larger conferences tend to be a little bit more like, we asked for a talk on X, and this is supposed to be a talk on X. But I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that like it's always in your best interest to do a talk that is interesting, whatever that means, and
Yes,
trying to fit that into however you can with the talk that you've had accepted.
definitely, definitely. So, okay, so let's talk very briefly about putting a talk together.
We'll have so many different processes for this.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. What what for you are kind of like what's your super high level process of putting the talk together? And like we're not going to talk about giving the talk because that's a whole nother thing. We don't have time for that. But let's talk about putting together the talk. So like you've created your CFP, like it got accepted, you got the email that's like congratulations, yay. Now you have to put together a talk. What do you, Sarah, tend to do to put together your talks?
I tend to write the talk out in a text file, like what I'm going to actually say. And I include pretty much everything, including the jokes. Like I write them all out. There are no spontaneous jokes in any of my talks. They're all planned because I'm that kind of person. And I will, and I rearrange it a lot and I try and make it's almost like arranging a series of tweets, right? Like there's sort of, you don't want to spend too much time on any given slide. And so you've got, sort of chunk it into bits, make sure it feels like it's got a story arc. And then I sort of take that and I paste it one at a time into Keynote, which is what I use for my slides, into the speaker notes of each slide. And then so I don't actually start making the slides themselves. I might storyboard it a little bit, like I might draw some stuff. Sometimes I'll like draw what the sequence of things that I want to happen. But I don't actually make slides until I feel like I've got most of the talk in my head, like not in my head, not memorized, but like it feels like most of it's mapped out. And I know other people have very different processes. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, mine is it's actually kind of the opposite. I start with the slides. And the way that, and this is kind of a theme for me, like I love telling a story. And so for me, it's extremely visual. I start with every single slide and I'm like, okay, this is generally what I want to talk about on each of these slides. Like I'll do a super basic outline in text form, like intro, first talk about this and then talk about this and then transition to this and then the end. And then I'll start making the slides for that. And then once I've started creating the slides, then I'll start doing the speaker notes. And then, but like my speaker notes are like bare. There's barely anything at all. Like I will put 2 words in my speaker notes.
I am so impressed with people that can do that. I cannot, oh my gosh.
But I practice probably about 1 billion times. So like because the thing is for me, if I write too many words, I sound incredibly scripted. There's just something about me, like when I driving down the highway, I'll see signs. I want to just say what the sign says. Like I have to train myself not to read the sign out loud. So knowing this about myself, I can't put word for word verbatim into my speaker notes or else I will sound scripted. So instead, I treat my slides like a page of a picture book. And I'm like, okay, so I'm telling the story and each slide is a new page. So I just have to I will put some words that are like, okay, remember to say this specific word because if you don't say the specific word, everything else falls apart. So it's really more of a cue for me, but the whole story just kind of flows through the slides. This means I have to practice saying it a bajillion times and it will never be the same talk twice, ever. It's a little bit riskier. I don't script my jokes. The jokes will just come out, which is terrifying because sometimes it falls so flat. But sometimes it's great.
My scripted ones do too. So I don't think it's that risky.
So, I think everybody has a little bit of a different way of doing things. I know some people who write it out word for word and then will sit there and read it. And it's like, that's a little dry, but if that's the best way that you can do it, if that's the best way to do you, then do you. That's the most important thing. And if it's your first talk, don't worry about it. By the time you give talk number 20, it'll feel natural and you'll just be able to, spin it out. It'll still take you 40 hours for a 40-minute talk, but you'll at least feel comfortable. Okay, this is the process.
And I know we said we weren't going to talk about actually doing the talk, but I do want to touch on a couple of things about actually doing the talk. One is that the audience really wants you to succeed. And I know when I got started talking, I imagined this audience of like essentially hostile people looking at me and waiting for me to mess up. And they were then going to like jump up and like, that's wrong. And it turns out that everyone in the audience is there because they're interested in this topic and they really want you to succeed at it. And I never had any success with like, imagine everybody naked or any of that stuff, right? Because like, as soon as I figured out that like, actually, they're rooting for me, like, that's okay. I can look at them like they're out there and they're not scary. That changed a lot for me because I started feeling like I was just talking to people that I knew, even though, whatever, I don't know them.
Yeah.
But they felt more like familiar people and less like sort of adversaries that I had to win over.
Definitely. I feel almost exactly the same way. Like, again, because of the whole storytelling scenario, I just think of myself next to a campfire telling stories. And that's the best part. Like, if I'm just reading a picture book to a group of kindergartners, not saying that everyone in the audience is a bunch of kindergartners, but if you imagine that in your head, it's like, oh, y'all are here to listen to me. My turn to tell you a story. And it's just really nice and really fun. And it doesn't have to be as terrifying. Although, I mean, you will still get butterflies. Not everybody does. Like, I'm now at the point where I get butterflies, like, as I turn, like, right when I start. And then they go away instantly. But when I first started, oh my God, the butterflies would be there for hours. It's totally normal.
Yeah, I can't eat before doing a talk, like on that day at all, which means that if I'm at the end of the day, like, it's not pretty. I'll go to lunch and I'll like pick at, I'm like, oh, that looks good, but I can't eat that. Nope, I don't feel like eating that.
Oh.
So yeah, everyone's got the thing, whatever the thing is. And it still happens to me. Like, I still get nervous. I've gotten better at faking not being nervous, I think, is the key difference. Like, I am probably as nervous as I was with talk number 1, but I appear much more confident. I've gotten much better at pretending to be confident.
I hear you. Totally hear you. Yeah. So anyway, anything else that we want to mention? I think we need to wrap up. But is there anything else you want to tell people about what to expect through this process?
I think I just want to remind people that you have something interesting to say. No matter where you are in your career, no matter how recently you started, no matter how long you've been here, no matter how different you are from the other people in the audience, you have something interesting that they want to learn about. And you should find it. Yeah,
definitely. And I totally echo that 100%. And I just want to say, like, this is fun. It's supposed to be fun. It shouldn't be scary or boring or, anxiety inducing too much. A little bit of fear is always a little good. Keeps you on your toes and keeps you moving. But ultimately, it's supposed to be fun. And if it's not fun, then there's something wrong. But ultimately, this is a really great opportunity for you to meet fantastic people, get really amazing jobs. Like, for me, at least, speaking was the propellant for my career. And so I encourage everybody to try that out. As long as it's fun.
Good luck with all of your proposals.
Thanks. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Rockbot. I'm happy to help review proposals and, go over grammar and talk ideas and all of that stuff. So definitely reach out to me on Twitter.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
What's your Twitter handle?
Sarah Mei. Sarahmei.
Excellent. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.